workers, indigenous people, and students have staged an uprising against the government of Iván Duque. His policies seek to make the hard-hit Colombian people pay for the brutal economic and health crises in which the country is submerged after decades of rampant neoliberalism. But the movement of workers and people in the streets, facing brutal repression, has said enough is enough. After making the government back down, the movement is in a decisive moment.
What sparked the fuse of these huge mobilizations and strikes? A tax reform bill that increased sales tax, including on several foods. This was the drop that overflowed a full glass of anger and indignation since April 28. The mobilizations have grown and have been met with brutality by the army and ESMAD, the Colombian riot police, specialized in repression and protest.
¡Esa mucha zapa hijo de puta! ¡Esa mucha zapa hijo de puta!
According to the NGO Temblores, between April 28 and May 8, the police and army killed 47 people, caused eye damage to more than 28, wounded almost 80 with firearms, or sexually assaulted 12 people. This brutal response was similar to that of the Carabineros, the national police in Chile. And as in Chile, the mobilization did not retreat. Duque, who came to power with Álvaro Uribe as his mentor, had to withdraw the reform bill.
Le solicito al Congreso de la República el retiro del proyecto radicado por el Ministerio de Hacienda.
But the working people, with the youth at the forefront, continue in the streets. The Minister of Finance Alberto Carrasquilla, who was a major proponent of the bill, resigned from his position in the government, and yet the mobilizations did not subside. Why?
Duque's government wants to take advantage of the pandemic to move forward with the privatization of healthcare and pensions. The demonstrations demand the fall of these measures and justice for the murdered, wounded, detained, and disappeared.
El objetivo de la protesta es que el presidente renuncie. Ha derramado demasiada sangre aquí en Cali, en el país. Necesitamos que se vaya.
Cali, Colombia's third largest city, is at the heart of the social unrest. It is one of the main economic and industrial centers after Bogotá and Medellin. The mobilizations of the native people also converged there. The union leaderships were forced to call a strike, and together with dozens of other organizations that make up the National Strike Committee. Last Wednesday, Colombia came to a standstill. Huge demonstrations and blockades at different points of the country's main cities, such as Bogotá, Medellin, and Cali, took place in a coordinated manner. Duque played a new card, negotiation, in an attempt to release some of the pressure in the streets. What is at stake?
The demands expressed in the streets question the Colombian regime. For decades, businessmen and their politicians have allowed Colombia to be a playground for the United States' imperialist policies in Latin America. Agreements such as Plan Colombia, signed in 1999 under the President Democrat Bill Clinton, allowed the United States to expand its influence in the area under the guise of fighting drug trafficking and terrorism, which they associated with the guerrillas. We must not forget that Joe Biden was a primary proponent of Plan Colombia, which created the mobile Anti-Disturbance Squadron, ESMAD. Between 2001 and 2016, the Northern Power provided $10 billion in financial aid to strengthen the armed forces of Colombia, the second largest US investment in another country after Israel. This encouraged institutional violence and paramilitary gangs trained by the United States Drugs Enforcement Agency. Meanwhile, the people saw their natural resources being auctioned off to imperialist companies. In 2016, the so-called peace accords integrated the FARC into the political regime, but the institutional violence did not end. Since then, more than 1,000 social leaders have been assassinated. Years of neoliberal policies driven by the United States and brutalization by the national police and the army, including paramilitary gangs, plunged a large part of the population into misery. In 2020, about 42.5% of the population was below the poverty line, that is 21 million Colombians, 7% more than in 2019, and 7.5 million people are considered to be in extreme poverty. 17% are unemployed and precarious work is widespread.
The government's call for civilized dialogue has been met in kind by a massive campaign to stigmatize protesters. They want to divide the movement between those who are peaceful and the vandals, and urban terrorists who are financed by drug trafficking. In this way, they seek to demonize those who go out in fury to confront the anti-riot squads. The policy of divide and conquer is a textbook practice done by governments around the world. Like in 2019, the leaderships of the trade unions are willing to enter into the trap of the call for dialogue, as its main center-left opposition politician, Gustavo Petro, with his mindset on future elections. The working class and oppressed can play a decisive role and demand that the unions call a general strike to paralyze all production and essential services until Duque and the neoliberal plans of imperialism fall and open the way to a solution favorable to the interest of the majorities. You can follow what is happening in Colombia through La Izquierda Diario and Left Voice, as we show the perspective of the working class and oppressed. From the US, we can play an important role in denouncing and fighting imperialist intervention in Colombia. We must push for an international campaign in support of the Colombian rebellion. Down with Duque and the austerity plans. Down with Plan Colombia. Imperialism out of Latin America.